This online series is brought to you by the Creative Youth Development National Partnership in collaboration with Grantmakers for Education, Arts Education Impact Group. It is hosted by the National Guild for Community Arts Education, and it made possible by generous support from the Claire Rose Foundation. The written briefs on which each webinar is based are part of the first phase of the Creative Youth Development Toolkit for the Field, a multi-year Creative Youth Development National Partnership project led by Americans for the Arts. Thanks for being here today. I would like to start by passing it to Ashley Hare, who will introduce herself.
Hi, thanks, Aurora. My name is Ashley Hare, and I am the author of the Working with Youth paper that we'll go over today and will soon be released shortly to all of you by Americans for the Arts. I won't go in depth in the paper today. It's a very short read. Each of the 7 authors, we were asked to write no more than about 4 or 5 pages and really look at key 3, 4, 5 trends in each particular category. So I will spend about 10 minutes going through this paper, but what I'm really excited about is we have 2 young people with us today who are doing incredibly phenomenal work, and I think it's really important to hear from them why working with youth and centering their leadership is important in ways that they've seen that done successfully and ways that they have seen some challenges. So I want to give some time for Paula and Sam to each speak for 10 minutes, and then we'll have hopefully a robust Q&A that Aurora will lead. So again, my name is Ashley Hare. I'm based out of Phoenix, Arizona, originally from the South. I also have been heavily involved in the Creative Youth Development Partnership and the growing of this movement. We are currently building a youth arts center on the south side of Phoenix. And we're integrating what it looks like to have art classes, but also washer and dryer to have young people wash their clothes while they're in art classes, a kitchen for some eating, and other holistic practices to really serve our young people with all full wraparound services. And so that's what a little bit I'll talk about today when I think about working with young people, especially from the Creative Youth Development lens. So I want to walk you through the 4 key points of the paper, but first, if we'll go to the next slide, Lisette, I just want to ground you in the policy and advocacy agenda of the Creative Youth Development Movement. This agenda has 5 recommendations that were created by numerous meetings of hundreds and hundreds of stakeholders over the last couple of years. And this one really touches home for me and for what's happening in the state of Arizona, especially being a border state and the violence that's happening on our border. But we look at, in this recommendation, develop and deepening opportunities for young people to create a more just and equitable society. So when we look at the values of working with young people in creative youth development, it is centering their voices and leadership, but it's also about social justice and racial equity. So what I looked at in this paper was this particular recommendation that came out of the policy and advocacy agenda, which is how do we collaborate with young people by truly integrating their voices and their leadership in the core structure. So this is not how do we create a kids table, as the young people I work with say. They don't want to be at the kids table at Thanksgiving, but they want to be integrated. So they don't want a youth advisory council, but they want to sit on the board and share leadership with adults. So what does that look like? And then the second paragraph, champion creative youth development programs as spaces of liberation from oppressive forces, because most of our young people that we are serving have multiple intersecting identities, be it their race, their gender, their sexual orientation, or their cognitive or physical ability. And so we have to acknowledge the whole self when we come into our art practice. So next slide, thank you, Lisette. To look at the challenges that are shared in this paper, there's really three that I wanted to hit today, and it's really moving from this model of adultism that we currently practice as adults in the arts sector and in all cross sectors to a true shared leadership model. And the challenges with getting to that is one that I have seen in writing this landscape analysis paper and talking to practitioners is one, we're not addressing how power is flowing between youth and adults. There's a definite power dynamic that comes out of just the way in which society has shaped our conversations with young people, what rights they have and don't have. The second thing is just a clear, the challenge is we're not looking truly at what it means to end adultism or even this definition of adultism that we need to start putting into our practice, which John Bell says is the systematic mistreatment and disrespect of young people. And third, one of the challenges that we're seeing is that we're often not having we're having a conversation about placement versus shared leadership. So placement, to me, what I'm seeing is I reference Roger Hart's ladder of youth participation, which you see on the right-hand side of the slide. And he talks about the ladder of youth participation in about 1992 in a paper with UNESCO about citizenship and children's rights, where we're placing young people at the bottom of this ladder. So we are oftentimes tokenizing them in spaces where they will come to a gala, or a conference, and they will perform at the beginning of it, but they won't actually be asked to sit in on the conference and share leadership and dialogue with adults. We're seeing a sort of decorational prop of young people for our funders, right? People love the beautiful come up trauma story from young people that we see propped up multiple times, especially when it comes to funding and funders. But what Roger really talks about is moving to the top of this ladder, which is not sitting at the middle, which is assigned but informed, or consulted and informed. And that means when we have a focus group with young people and we ask them, hey, what kind of programming do you want to see this season? How are you feeling about the program we just had, and doing debriefs with them. But ultimately, at the end of the day, adults are taking back that information after consulting with young people and making the decisions. And so what young people are asking for, and what we're seeing this even through the climate change movement to the social justice movement, young people in the arts sector, young people are wanting to be sharing leadership with adults. And it doesn't mean that they want the keys to the city and that they're going to run amok. I often hear that from adults all the time. Well, we can't give them everything. But it's actually about sharing power and sharing leadership and really having what young people are telling me, a true democracy and leadership. And that's really hard, and that takes time. And sometimes that does drag the timeline out a little bit, but it makes for a more intentional process if we're truly getting to the top of that ladder. So there's some three challenges that we're seeing. And I think if we start to address power and start to understand what adultism is and where we're placing young people, that we can start to look at how to move forward and have some agility around creating true shared leadership spaces. So I'm going to go quickly through these four key elements that you'll see in the paper. And again, the paper is quite short. It's an easy read. I encourage everyone to read. All 7 papers are quite short and an easy read, and they're all really, really wonderful in the series. And so each of these points are about half a page to a page long. And so I just want to show you what you'll be reading once the paper is released. So next slide, please. So the first one that we're looking at is expanding the rights of young people. When we look at the rights of young people, we acknowledge that in US culture and society that young people, and I'm saying young people under the age of 18, although I know some programming goes to 21 or 24, young people have been deemed inferior to adults. and that our culture centers either safety from young people, so we must keep young people, society is safe from young folks. So we see this a lot when young people become teenagers and they're grouped in a parking lot or a park together, right? We have to, that makes them violent or delinquent automatically when they're grouped together in public. So we have to keep the public safe from them. And then the opposite, what we're seeing is that there is a cultural norm that we have to keep young people safe from everything else. So when they're younger, we're patting them and from censorship, right? So they are passive beneficiaries of charitable assistance. We have to help them come up. And so we're seeing these two different binaries come up with young people, whether they're passive beneficiaries that need to be helped by us, or they're labeled as violent and criminal, and why are they standing together at 10 o'clock at night? They must be up to no good. And that really comes from the way that we have deemed young people under the age of 18. They have no voting rights. They have no right to own property. They cannot legally establish a business. And yet when they turn 18, they're supposed to be fully contributing citizens and voting and knowing how to budget and getting out of the house and going to college right away. But we actually don't share leadership of what it means to be a fully contributed member of society, whatever that may mean to individuals. And so when we look at expanding the rights of young people, we're trying to understand a concept shift from keeping them safe to letting them lead and sharing that leadership with them, as we would do with all marginalized groups. When we are making decisions, and if those decisions affect them, they must be at the table. Next slide, please. Trend 2 in the paper is removing the deficits and redefining assets. So this is about shifting knowledge production that is adult-centered, which is always asking, how much experience do you have? Let me teach you. Or how much the quantifying experience, like I've done this for 10 years and have this many awards under my belt, and so I must know more, to a youth-centered knowledge sharing approach, which is what type of experience do you hold? What types of experience do you have? So oftentimes young people are telling me it's not about how am I smart, yes or no, but in what ways am I smart? And that really gets us to not looking at deficits, but looking at the assets that young people have. And it also means that we have to shift our language. Currently, our language that we see is future leaders, tomorrow's leaders, empowered, cultivating the next generation, when actually they have a knowledge base that is ready and willing to be integrated into the conversation now. So what I hear them saying from the young people I work with locally and nationally is that we actually are today's leaders and we're ready to be integrated today and a part of those conversations. So it requires a language shift to truly get to authentically working with young people collaboratively in shared leadership. Third slide. This one we're hearing a lot about in education, educational settings, traditional education settings, as well as our higher education, college. There's a quote from a really wonderful young man who at the time was a high school senior, Jose Romero, who said, for 10 years, the first decade I was in school, all of my teachers were white women. As a Mexican-American kid, I didn't get the chance to have a man of color as a teacher. And going into my senior year, I like how diverse my teachers are now, and I wish I had that experience when I was younger. And so when we look at what's happened over youth development over the last decade or two of writings and theories, this quote, this other tag that I put in this slide really talks about the affirmation of one's identity and how it has a powerful and beneficial outcome on the development of young people and their own identity. And what they have found in the 90s is that young people who spend time passing or code switching to fit dominant race or culture, gender norms, they're suffering from isolation and invisibilization, as well as marginalization. And so there's something to be said about the survey that came out recently around the art sector and how the art sector is dominated by a particular gender and a particular race and a particular heterosexual cisgendered class. That actually doesn't represent the young people that are coming up from multiple intersecting races and identities and sexualities. And so that needs to be acknowledged of how we start to close that gap and have true representation, so young people feel like they see themselves as they're growing up in the art sector and all sectors as well. And then finally, the fourth one, sharing governance and leadership. So this one's always tricky for adults, right? How do you remove your control and needing power to really let young people lead and be a support mechanism in the back? And what I wanted to show was this video, and we won't show the audio. The audio is not necessary. I think it's just music. But in 2018 in Phoenix, Arizona, so we have a statewide conference called the Joint Arts Education Conference. And Lisette, you can start to play the video while I'm talking. And this conference had been going on for numerous of years. Like most conferences, it was educators who were coming together to talk about young people and how to be better arts educators for young people. And young people came to the State Arts Commission and said, wait a second, there's a conference where adults are having conversations about how to better educate us. But they're actually not, we're not in the space, and you're not actually having a conversation about what our thoughts are. And so we took that feedback to heart, and we said, you know what, in 2018, when we do this conference biannually, we will hire, all paid, because young people need to get paid for their time, hire a youth planning committee, all under the age of 19, to look at what topics in the classroom they want. So you'll see in the video, these topics: social justice isn't just us, intersectionality, beyond Eurocentric curriculum. These were topics that made adults uncomfortable to have, but young people really wanted to have in this conference. They also spent a lot of time developing the presentations themselves. They had a hiring process, call for proposals from other young people, where other young people could be presenters at the conference. So not only were young people the planning team members, but then they hired their peers to be the presenters at the conference. So it was fully led and planned, engaged by young people. And the keynote, they wanted it to be with adults from CYD, a Creative Youth Development Organization in San Antonio, Texas. And so we flew 2 adults in and had a shared keynote dialogue where both adults and young people got to share that keynote space in that conference. I think the feedback was really wonderful. I think young people really enjoyed themselves. 50% of the people who attended were young people. And it was quite astounding to see sort of the disruption that happened from adults who had been going to this conference year after year, who had to now share equal one-to-one ratio space with young people in their sessions, as well as seeing them on stage and seeing them running around doing logistics and leading the conference. And there were some really beautiful conversations that could happen because young people were able to share their experiences in arts education classroom and how they wanted to see arts education grow. And so that was one very recently that we have done here in Phoenix, Arizona, and trying to figure out what it looks like to really truly share leadership. That year, we wanted young people to plan and lead, so completely flipping it on its head, to then scale back and see, okay, now that young people know that they can do this when they have been told they couldn't, how do we now integrate adults and young people together to share leadership where one is not over the other? And so that's the hope when we go into this next year. And we're also seeing this nationally with young people who are doing the National Young Artist Summit that is coming up in October at the National Guild Conference, where young people are planning and leading a day-long summit for young people to come together and talk about arts and social justice and entrepreneurship and education. So I'm going to stop talking. I think that's a short, clear overview, and I hope that if you have questions, that you write them out, share them in the chat box, so Aurora can be looking at gathering all of those questions. But I really would love, love, love to turn it over to Paula Odega, and she's going to start us off talking about her experience and what she's doing in Arizona, and then give the mic to Sam. Thank you.
I work at a theater company as a transforming artistic collaborator. I am also a co-founder for Reframe Youth Art Center. I also really excited to be part of the National Youth Artistic Summer Planning. And my dreams are that we can work all together to create an awesome space where young people can collaborate and experience and express themselves and art. Well, I think this is an amazing I think this conversation is really good, and I think it's important for everybody to know that, like, involving young people, it's really important, especially because young people, like, we carry a lot of, like, knowledge. Um, Aside from, like, we also carry a stigma because young people think we're not smart enough, or we don't really know something very well. But it's really important because when it comes to decision making, we are the ones that are going to be affected by those decisions at the end of the day. Um, and the way that it looks like when you involve young people, it's like listening to young people. It's really important to listen to young people, like really listen with an open mind. Encourage opportunities for leadership as well. um, like allow them to like step up, be there when you're creating an agenda, things like that. Like hold high expectations for them. Like they like let them fall. If we make mistakes, let us make mistakes, and we will learn from those things. Like for example, I'm also a teaching artist with an adult collaborator, and I teach at high school. And um, I sometimes struggle with facilitation, and the way that I got a bit more better is by him letting me facilitate, and we create a code word. When I like get really stuck to the moment that I cannot move on, I'm like, hey, would you like to jump in, or do you want to like elaborate on that? That's how he knows that he can jump in instead of like jumping in real quick and like taking all the like the momentum, or like taking all the like the moment of like away from me. I also think it's really important to like understand that we were all young people at one point, and like how, like that like young people, like we we are smart and we have a lot to say, and like a lot of the things that are happening, um, like I said, are going to affect us at the end of the day. And I would like to introduce you to Sam. He's from Detroit, and he's amazing.
Hi, everyone. My name is Samuel Fairley, and I am a participant of Mosaic Theater of Detroit. There, I received training in vocal performance and theatrical art. When you see youth leadership, you see a different type of engagement with the young artists. First, like, it's okay to have an adult or someone of authority to be in the room, but when you have someone who shares the same respect with young artists, you go, everyone wants to participate. It gives them reason to pursue their career and to pursue their dreams rather than, oh, you just come in and then you do this, you do that. Like you have no say, but when you do have say, it pushes you to continue to grow, and you love the challenges you give. And at Mosaic, I love the fact that, you know, they do have set aside youth leadership positions, but also they ask you what you want to do. And then they really take into consideration, like this season, we have our own work arts program, our own work arts company, and we're basically designing the show, our May show. We put on 3 shows every year, and they're like, what do you want to do? How do you want to get involved with this show? And it's like amazing because growing up, I didn't always have that opportunity. Like it was always stay in a child's place, respect who's older than you, do what your teacher told you to do. But sometimes it's like, well, what if I don't want to do it and it's not coming as I don't want to be disrespectful, but like, maybe we can do something like this. Maybe we can do it a different way with Mosaic and youth leadership. It makes more sense because everyone wants to be more productive instead of just being told what to do and how to do it. And with Mosaic, like Delishay representation, she's African-American woman who's the artistic director of a nonprofit that is globally ranked. Like, that is just amazes me because you don't see that a lot. Like, even with school, I didn't see a lot of African-American male or women teachers teaching me. I always just saw a Caucasian lady just standing in front of me giving me instructions. And I'm like, I can't connect, you know? And now that I'm in this amazing company, you see the staff is so diverse and they're so inclusive to what you want to do and how you want to go about doing things. It just makes you feel important in their language. Like, they don't call you kids. They call you young artists because that's what you are. And being called a kid sometimes makes you feel like you can't really speak up about how you feel because it has a stigmatism to them or connotation like, oh, those kids are doing this or those kids are being bad. No, we're young artists and we respect each other's craft. And that's what I feel like youth leadership does, a well-needed level of respect between, excuse me, between the adults and the young artists. Thank you.
Aurora, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you all. So appreciations for all of that sharing. I want to encourage folks to populate the chat box with questions if you have them. So far we have one question for the group. And that is if any of you were able to collaborate with the Boston convening, their annual team convening at ICA. And so were any of you able to do that? And if so, what was that experience like? For the panel, for the group, anybody? Did anyone participate?
No.
No? Okay, moving on.
No,
All right.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. The National Young Artist Summit, this is our second year coming up. And the first year sort of happened in a blink of an eye and really fast in like a month. It was super successful though. And so what we're hoping to do is now create an intentional, on the creativeyouthdevelopment.org website, an intentional place to hold for young people who are having their own local summits. So ICA has one, San Diego has a summit, Phoenix has a summit that they do every year, a Young Artist Summit. And so how do we intentionally look at maybe partnering? This National Young Artist Summit that has grown out of the Creative Youth Development has been a call. I think this year we had about 60, 70 young people who applied to be on a 10-person team. Some of those young people did come out of ICA and other organizations nationally, but they make up one young person from multiple areas of the country. And we intentionally, wherever the conference is every year, we intentionally put at least 3 to 5 young people, half of the team from that area, in hopes that they create their own. So last year, the National Guild conference was in Baltimore. And so we held the summit in Baltimore and half of the team was from Baltimore. And they found that really, really helpful because now they've created a structure to have their own youth summit. So that's part of the practice I think that we're going for is, yes, how do we get other organizations who already have their summits to this national convening, but how do we help cities, like we're gonna be in Austin this year, and what does it look like for Austin and the San Antonio larger area to have their own youth summit? And how can we support them while we're on the ground there? And so we're having conversations in that way. But I'd love to, in the future, hopefully next year, now that we've got some footing, to look at how do we bring all of these other summits together, or at least some young people from it.
Great, thank you. Okay, now we got lots of questions flowing. So this is a great question. How can we hold our organizations, our youth organizations accountable in centering the leadership of young people? How do we do that either as folks that are inside of the organizations, maybe with less positional power, or people that are on the outside as community, extended community? How do we do that?
I can speak on that. So I thank you for the question. I think eliminating all the isms like adultism, dysfunctional rescuing, and all of those things, I think that's starting there and like seeing where those things live in the organization. Like blaming the victim, avoiding contact, denial of difference, denial of political significance of oppression, like all those things have to be eliminated in order to like fully move forward into youth leadership. And like, for example, like the way that you can avoid that is having young people like go over their trauma again, to speak at conference and talk about how like this organization saved their life and whatever. Those things are starting with those things, and also starting with like inviting young people to like the decision making meetings, inviting young people when deciding in the next project. And it's really important when we engage young people from the beginning, because if you're trying to engage them like in the middle of it, it becomes really hard, and young people sometimes like tend to like back away because the conversation is already like developed since the beginning. So making sure young people are there from day one, and that would also allow adults to be held accountable when it comes to making decisions about that project or the conference or whatever that the organization is doing.
Great. Thank you. So kind of bridging on that,
Yeah.
want to add on to that, Ashley?
May I?
Yes, please.
One thing that we think about, so Reframe Youth Arts Center has 50% adults and staff under the age of 19, always, on the board, on the board and on staff. And one thing that we think about is, would I ever say that to somebody else who's marginalized? Would I say that to an adult, or would I say that to a Black man or a Black woman? We would never say, oh, you're so articulate for a Black man, right? We would never say that, but we say that to young people all the time. Oh, you were so smart and articulate up there. You would never say that to an adult. And you especially would never say that to somebody who's more marginalized. Sometimes I was somewhere and somebody was saying, oh, when my kid acts up, I pinch them on the elbow. And I'm like, what would happen if a grown man said, oh, when my wife acts up, I pinch her? Like those are things that you would never say because you have a certain type of respect, but we don't actually have that respect for young people because they are deemed as property legally in the US culture. And because they're property, we adults feel like we can control a lot of their own narratives and a lot of their own being. And I think that's the shift to holding people accountable, is really asking, like, would you say that to to an adult or somebody else? And asking, like, where have they been in the decision-making process, to what Paula is saying from the very beginning.
Nice. Yeah, bridging on that, I'm curious, and this is kind of putting together a couple of questions that have been asked. What are some of the practices that you've experienced when really authentically partnering with an adult, co-conspirator, or a teaching artist? How do they start their time with you? How do they set the tone in a way that's actually like feels like shared leadership, like you're building something in that way? Are there practices, are there ways of being that you've experienced that you can share with us? Just as we're thinking about how like teaching artists and, you know, how adults are working with adults. Oh, I think we're muted again. Sam, are you trying to?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can.
Okay.
You're sideways, but.
Oh, sorry.
It's all good.
Okay. So when I would work with an adult and like we would just set ground rules like step up, step back, you know, like if you're talking too much, you might want to just let the other person speak in more, or like if you're not talking enough, you might want to jump in the conversation more. And also most of my time when I'm talking to an adult, they ask me, what do I want to talk about? You know, it's not always about like, yeah, you have certain things to get done on the agenda, but it's also just what's on your mind? What do you feel like needs to be addressed? How do you want things to go? Or what are some solutions? If you have a problem for it, it's not just, okay, I'm just gonna come in here, I'm gonna tell you what I wanna say, and then you just have to abide by it, you know? So it's also just like self-evaluation and peer evaluation. You wouldn't want anyone to just come in and be like, okay, so here's what we're gonna do. You have no say. You will want somebody to be like, okay, so I think maybe we can do this. Do you have any suggestions? And that's what I find a lot at Mosaic is like, they ask you what you want to talk about and what you want to address.
Mm. So really leading with the interests and the expertise of young people. That's what I'm hearing. Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome. Beautiful. So there are questions, kind of getting back to the first question that was asked. I think for folks that are coming from really traditional type organizations, I heard, Paola, you talking about, you know, like assessing the language, the practices, to really look at those ways that we marginalize or push people to the margins and trying to recenter the practices. So for an organization that is coming from a really like a totally different vantage point, what are some initial ways that, like, some first steps that they can take to begin to even start assessing kind of where they stand in the work that is ahead of them? I think is what I'm gathering from questions that are coming through, specifically for organizations that aren't centering young people or partnering with young people in an authentic way. Kind of a tough question. Any thoughts on that? Just like first steps that we could take.
Can you repeat the last part? You kind of broke up. I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, so like for an organization that's coming from a really different, like more of an adultist, more of an adult all the adults make decisions, kind of hierarchical setting. What are some first steps that they can take, like top down, you know, like all of the decisions are made by adults, et cetera. What are some first steps that they can take to begin to move, to even understand what kind of work they need to do in the future, to begin to unpack that and shift? Anyone have thoughts on that?
If the organization does work with young people, use the ladder. I think using the ladder would help a lot. And seeing where those decisions or like where the organization and the adults fall in the ladder. And then from there, start conversations with young people. Ask them, like Sam said, ask them what they want to do. Ask them what they're thinking. Really like listen to them. Talk to them. We're not scary. I know there's some adults out there that are scared of us young people, which is really interesting. We're really cool. We're cool people. So ask us questions. Ask us what we want to do. And we can start from there. That's putting young people in the beginning, like having them start from the beginning of like the conversation. That would help a lot.
And we can refer to that. Go ahead. Yes. Sam?
Oh, I was just gonna say also what Paula said previously is just to remember that you were once also a young artist as well, and also just remembering the desires and the passions you had growing up and participating in organizations that you were involved in. Just remember the things that you wanted to see happen, or what did you want to see? What did you want to put in, but you couldn't suggest because of how traditional or how the organization was ran. So if you just have that mindset that you want to be heard and that everyone's voice matters, that can be a step to switching your organization.
Thank you.
I was recently contacted by a traditional theater company that has an adult season, but also puts on, you know, some children's theater shows and has a summer camp. And they were trying to create, similarly, they were asking, how do they get young people? Young people aren't coming. Young people aren't on an advisory board. They're trying to make an advisory board so they can hear what they want to say. And so they couldn't figure out how to do agency. And that really made me start thinking about, they were asking me, like, how are you, your young people continuously are coming, and how is that possible? One, when we do anything, when young people are asked, for example, this webinar, when young people are asked to be on something or to do something, they are always paid. So when first step of creating agency is that they're always paid. It may be 50 bucks, it may be $100, but it's something that acknowledges that you are worth your time and energy. And I always have that conversation with them, like, hey, we're a small startup and I can only pay you 50 bucks, but I need to pay you something because I need to I want to acknowledge you, just like I'm acknowledging the quote professional adult artist. And oftentimes you can see people's values by what their budget looks like. And if you're not putting money towards young people, but you're asking them to go and perform at something, but they're not getting paid, but maybe the adult artists working alongside them are getting paid, it doesn't set them up to feel like they have any agency. It doesn't make them feel good. And so we always pay young people no matter what. That's the first step, is really looking at your budget to see where can you start paying young people. If young people are asked to go and like we see a lot of spoken word pieces all the time. Young people are asked to go and open up a conference and do one spoken word piece, but those young people aren't paid. And most of the time, I went to a conference with a couple of young people and they were asked to do a performance. They weren't paid. This was several years ago. And I was like, great, if they're not paid, then they're gonna eat. And then they told me that they couldn't eat. And I was like, you have a huge buffet of food. They're gonna eat food. Like, it was so, they were like, no, they're gonna come in, they're gonna perform and then leave. And they put us in this tiny room and we had to sit there and wait. And then I finally was like, this is ridiculous. And so we all went out and I made them eat, and just sort of broke code. I was like, there's just, it was kind of absurd. It felt like an absurdist play. So I would say the first thing for sure is that they need to get paid. The second thing I would say is, to Sam's point, is about the labels. So calling them young artists, whatever you're calling them, needs to be examined. So you're not calling them like your students. So I wonder what your language is, and I would ask yourself that as an organization. And then if you're doing any sort of the tell your trauma story at a gala, you know, what are the repercussions of that? And what mechanisms do you have in place, especially if you're not paying them, and especially if they're leaving right afterwards? Because every time they tell the story, there's something that's coming up again, and we actually don't acknowledge that. It comes up a lot in spoken word, where young people are having to relive something through poetry, but we actually don't have a decompression space for them once they've spit something on a mic. And that's really hard. So we need to understand how we're acknowledging their full selves when they're doing that. And then I think the small integrations of giving them agency, for example, young people who are sitting on advisory councils, like, how can they come and sit in on the board? How can they present something to the board? How can they lead a board meeting? So there starts to be small integrations where they start to feel a little more confident about who they are. So they feel like maybe people will listen to me in this space. So it can start really small, but having it separated and segregated is really harmful. What we've done in the past, when I worked for the City of Phoenix Office of Arts and Culture, we did have a youth council, but we asked them to constantly, every other board meeting, go in and lead things so they've got to feel more confident. So it produced anxiety that we talked about, but we were able to talk through that anxiety and get them to a place where they got more and more confidence to actually feel like they were being heard. Those are a couple of things that we've seen here.
Yeah.
Carla's nodding.
Really practical. Thank you.
Mm.
Another question that I've seen in a couple different iterations is what role does or does age in terms of like, you know, a young artist who's 10 versus 16 play a role in how that partnership should look? Is it different depending on if you're working with, you know, someone in high school versus someone or high school age versus elementary? And what would be the difference?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So in the Mosaic, we have like a tiered program. So we have like second stage, which is geared towards younger people. And then we have like main stage, which is like 12 and up. But throughout the programs, it doesn't matter like how old you are. If you feel like you would like to see something happen, they still take into account. It's just when dealing with ages, you have to realize that at that age, they might want something different than what a 6-year-old might want. So I feel like we have that tier program so we can try to focus on what each age group prefers and what age group wants and like how they want to see it happen rather than it just being, oh, the 16-year-old is older than you, so this is the way it's going to go. So sometimes you like, not to say you have to separate, but you have to make a balance of when age comes into play, especially when you have younger artists in the same company as older artists. I'm sorry.
Great. Anyone else want to chime in on that? All right. Let me look at time real quick. Okay, so we have just a few minutes left. A question about kind of, I think, scaffolding, deepening of programs, growth of programs, alongside making sure that young artists at your organization are compensated. Is it a factor in slowing? Are we saying that we have to grow slower as a result of you know, needing to provide these financial incentives for the young people that we partner with? And if so, how can that be navigated kind of on the budget side to allow for the organization to grow and also make sure that they're meeting the needs of young people in terms of paying them for their work and expertise? So kind of these two factors, budgeting and growth, or three factors, budgeting, growth, and making sure that, young artists are at the center.
Well, I think when it comes to budgeting, young people should also be in those conversations. I think it's really important for them to understand how money is also being worked and moved around in the organization that they're part of. For Reframe, we have 2 adults and then 2 young people with a budget, and they like look at things and they're like, oh, we need to fundraise for this, and this is how much we need to fundraise, and this is how the money's moving around. The way that we see budgeting, well, the way that I see budgeting is like pants, and every pants has little pockets, and that's where the money is. So like also like young people, the young artists, they should be able to see like how much money is being spent on them. This is how much money is being spent on the adults. Yeah.
So being integral to the process of creating those budgets and understanding those budgets as part of that being part of that conversation, the importance of that.
Yeah, and I think, again, it goes back to the adult question, right? So, I mean, if you reverse that and said adults, the question would be, do you have to grow slower to a paid adult artist?
Right.
You know, and I think I always think it's a value question. because we run a nonprofit. We're only a year old, and our operating budget's only about $20,000. And yet we have made a decision, and again, we're smaller, so we're more nimble, we can do this, but we have made a decision that the young people that are involved in, say, the project story map that we just did, the digital culture map, when they went out and did an interview, you know, they were getting paid $20 for, you know, a couple of hours of time. And I think, to Paula's point, it depends on the ratio. So if you're a nonprofit and you're very small and everyone is volunteer, then maybe there's a full transparency that everyone is volunteered. So it's not like young people are getting paid and adults aren't, but maybe young people need some support with transit. So we always offer bus passes, especially when we can't offer a stipend. We will always pay for their transportation and give them a bus pass to get home. And so there are other optional ways to support them in being involved, because there's multiple barriers for a lot of the young people we work with. Also, people keep talking about a pipeline for the arts sector and how to get it diverse when they become adults. Most of the young people that we're working with, because we've been intentional about giving them something, 1 month we missed the stipend, so we give $100 stipend for this last project we did. And one young person came up, I missed it by 2 days because we have a federal credit union and I couldn't pay in the weekend. I had to wait till Monday. And one of them said, hey, just a reminder, I use that money to pay groceries for my family. And because she needs the money to pay for groceries so she doesn't have to go back and work at Subway. And then another young man said, hey, I use this money, are we going to get it on Monday? Because I use this money for my private violin classes because I'm trying to get ready to apply to college. And so he's actually using the money. So when we talk about pipeline and we talk about diversity of the arts sector, and yet we're not understanding the barriers that they're facing, and we say it's a budget issue, we're not actually giving agency or we're not actually doing equitable practices. I think we have to really look at our budget and scrape and scrap. And sometimes the young people on the budget team will say, we can't do that because that's gonna eat into stipends. And so we need to either find in-kind food or we can't have food. Or we can't get that fancy paper that everybody wants for this. We need to go find it. And there's a hustle that happens because young people are used to not having a lot of things. So super hustles that we didn't even know. They were like, you can get free colored printing down on like 43rd Avenue and like Indian School. You just walk in. And I'm like, I didn't know. They're like, oh yeah, you can do like 100 prints of color. You know, why are you going to Kinko's? They know where these places are. And so we were able to scrap and manage and not eat into the budget, because the budget was really important to pay our artists. And because young people are artists, they were always paid. So, I mean, our budget is small. We don't have a lot. We have to pay rent, which is a huge chunk of our budget, the majority of our budget, because rent's expensive. But we're always making sure that whatever is top on our budget line stays there, and then everything else has to be hustled for.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So I want to just appreciate each of you. That was really fun. Thank you so much. I can't wait to continue the conversation. I want to encourage people to read the paper that we're talking about. It's really concise and, you know, straightforward. There's a lot of information in a small amount of pages. I just want to name that I didn't get to all the questions. And I am getting a question about where can we find the paper, and I believe that will be sent out. It's being designed right now, and will be sent out by the Guild. So you will have access to that. I'm not sure what the actual date that'll go out. Do you know, Ashley? Okay, soon, probably within the next couple.
I think it's supposed to be this week, but I don't know.
It's worth the wait, so check that out once it's out. And just want to say, okay, go ahead.
They're
Yep.
sending it directly to everyone that signed up for the webinar. So you don't have to dig around the Guild website, like you'll get a direct to your email that you signed up.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Sorry.
So thanks for attending the webinar today. The next webinar in the series will happen on August 28th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and it's titled Trends in Creative Youth Development Programs with a Focus on Equity, of course, followed by Working in Social Justice, Focus on Justice, and on September 26th from 1 to 2 p.m. That's on September 26th from 1 to 2 p.m. If you want to stay up to date on the work that's happening through the Creative Youth Development Movement, National Partnership, all of that, you can visit creativeyouthdevelopment.org and sign up for the monthly newsletter. Thanks for being on this call with us today. Thank you all for the panelists, and hope everyone has a beautiful day.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Paula.
Thank you.
Bye.